In so many American foods, those vibrant colors that beat the eyes come from potentially dangerous artificial dye.
There's a number of food additives, including Red 3, that have very clear health risks, including risk of cancer.
And what took the FDA so long to address the colors as culprits?
The FDA food program, for the last several decades at least, they've been asleep at the wheel.
This week, concerns over what could be the dying days of artificial food dyes.
One key cost that fueled the presidential election was the cost of gas.
In many ways, I think energy was on the ballot.
Is there a true belief, though, that oil and gas producers will be increasing production due to President Trump returning?
This week, we look at the promise.
Drill, baby, drill.
And the prospects.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
And a look at the exponential expectations of savings for the American taxpayer.
You could squeeze out or redirect probably $100 billion of just Pentagon fraud.
$100 billion?
$100 billion.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. We begin today with growing attention being paid to what's in the food we eat. Artificial food dye may not be one of your biggest concerns or any concerns at all, but maybe it should be. California recently became the first state to ban synthetic food coloring and several other food additives. And now the pressure is increasing on the FDA to act on a national level years after studies show some of these chemicals cause cancer in animals and are associated with a host of other health risks. Before she became a parent, Erin Saradian says she didn't give much thought to food coloring.
So funny, like 15 plus years ago, my sister-in-law, we were visiting them in Texas, and they made a comment like the kids can't have anything with dye in it because it makes them hyperactive. And my husband and I, at the time, we weren't married, we were like, oh, okay, you know, they must be crazy, like that's not a real thing.
Years later, when they had their own son, Jack, it no longer seemed crazy.
Every time he had anything with dye in it, he had the hardest time focusing. He was more irritable, cranky, angry, and you would be surprised about how many food products contain food dye. So to this day now, when he eats anything with dye in it at school and he comes home, I can tell right away. And sure enough, I look in his backpack and I find something that has dye in it.
How old was he when you first made this discovery?
5. He was 5, very young.
So you feel pretty bad if you eat something with food dye. And what's the difference if you avoid it? How do you feel?
I start having like stomach pains and head pains, and and if I don't have food dye, I'm perfectly fine. I feel a lot more energetic, a lot more. It's easier for me to think and remember things. And
scientific studies back up a connection. But before we get to that, some background. Over time, hundreds of artificial food dyes have been created, many made from crude oil. Most were eventually pulled from the market for being toxic. Only 9 are still allowed in food in the U.S. Synthetic colors are often cheaper and brighter than natural dye and often don't add unwanted flavor. Red dye number 3 is in many bright-colored sodas, juices, candy, yogurt, cereal, baked goods, and snacks. Sarah Sorsher is with the Center for Science and the Public Interest. It's one of 24 consumer groups that 2 years ago petitioned the FDA to ban red dye number 3.
Some of the synthetic food dyes have been associated with cancer risks. Red 3 was associated with cancer in animal studies. There's very clear evidence tying Red 3 to cancer risks in animals, and those studies were conducted in the 1980s.
In 1990, the Food and Drug Administration actually acted on those studies to ban Red 3 from cosmetics. So currently you can't go to the store and buy lipstick with Red 3 in it. But FDA never took action on Red 3 in foods. So you can still go to the store and purchase Halloween candy or Easter candy that contains Red 3.
How can that be?
The FDA food program is the agency that's supposed to be serving as a watchdog on our food system. But for the last several decades at least, they've been asleep at the wheel. They are disorganized and they are vulnerable to capture from the food industry. And as a result, there's a number of food additives, including Red 3, that have very clear health risks, including risk of cancer, where FDA has allowed them to remain on the market, even knowing the clear risks.
Today, numerous studies have linked artificial dyes and other food chemicals to cancer, immune problems, and brain issues like hyperactivity. The FDA recently banned brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, used in some sports drinks and sodas. It's linked to brain, thyroid, heart, liver, developmental, and reproductive problems.
I want to ask you about Red 3 and Red 40.
When pressed at a hearing last month, FDA officials said to expect the agency to finally act soon on the petition to pull red dye number 3.
Red 3 has been known to cause cancer in cosmetics, but we still allow it to be put in our food. I don't understand that. Go ahead.
So Red 3, we have a petition in front of us to revoke the authorization for it, and we are hopeful that within the next few weeks we will be acting on that petition, and a decision should be forthcoming.
And so did you try to take most artificial food dye out of his diet?
Yes, we have a thing. You're not supposed to have dye. It's really, really hard to control, especially with kids who go to daycare, who go to school, who do summer camps, who have birthday parties, because most of the food that is served in all those places contains some form of dye, whether it's in a bag of chips or in candy, even in marshmallows, like white marshmallows contain blue dye. It's in so many different things, it's so hard to control. So I would make this one, and let's not do these. So then
a handful of states are already considering action, saying the FDA isn't doing enough to get allegedly harmful food chemicals off grocery shelves. The additives include red dye number 3, or erythrocene, red dye number 40, yellow dye number 5 and 6, blue dye number 1 and 2, and green dye number 3. Also, titanium dioxide used in marshmallows, candy, creamers, cheese, and sauces to whiten or make added colors more vivid. It's banned in Europe and linked to digestive and immune problems and genetic damage. Azodicarbonamide, commonly used in bread and pastries, it reportedly can cause cancer in mice and people. Butylated hydroxyanisole, BHA, a preservative used in many snack foods, junk food, butter and vegetable oils, nuts, meat, and more. It's linked to cancer in animal studies. Potassium bromate, used in bread and other baked goods and frozen food, linked to cancer. And propylparaben, a preservative in baked desserts, cake icing, and more. It can disrupt hormones and cause fertility issues in animals.
The companies are constantly watching consumer trends.
We asked Sarah Gallo about the safety questions. She's with the Consumer Brands Association, a trade group that represents food and beverage companies.
What is the best answer to studies that exist in Europe and here in the United States that imply a host of health issues, potential health issues with artificial food dyes, everything from ADD to cancer?
Yeah, I think, these additives have been studied for decades, and it's really important to know, too, that nothing is just going into the marketplace without there being a rigorous science system in advance of those products being added to what we purchase every day for our families. And to date, there have not been any studies that show causation between any specific additive and a certain outcome.
And what would be your response to a specific family who may say they somehow identified that artificial food dye was making their child's health different, and that when they removed this from the diet, the child got better?
I think what the science and risk-based system that we have allows consumers to do is, if they're wondering about the safety of something, we have that system to rely on. If they want to choose for certain ingredients or products that don't have those ingredients, there are transparency measures that allow them to do that.
Is it fair to say your position is that artificial food dyes cannot cause any health concerns?
I'm not going to comment on any medical issues.
Okay.
Of course, it's possible to make food without the synthetic dye, and some companies are adjusting. European health authorities began reevaluating additives in 2008, banning or restricting many. Skittles in Europe are formulated without titanium dioxide, and Pez in Europe has no red dye number 3.
You can tell because it's so bright red.
California's recent ban on red dye number 3 and several other food additives takes effect in 2027, giving companies time to consider revising their recipes.
What do you think should be done about it here in this country?
I think if other countries like the UK and Europe have a warning label on it, the US should too. Why is it acceptable in other countries to warn parents about it? Why in the US do we not warn our own children? We got this in the UK. This one is made with all natural dyes, so he can eat this, which is great.
Whenever I'm at like parties or like at stores, I always try to like read labels on candies, try to get like if there's like non-dye brands, then I try to get that, or I just hold myself back and just say, no, I'm okay, I'm allergic, I can't have it.
So there are a lot more options now than there were 6 or 7 years ago. And I would just say, look at what's on your product and try it out. It may not affect your children at all, which is great. But if it does, at least now you know, and really just, reading the labels and testing it. Give them something with dye, see how they act.
2 more points from the FDA. They believe red dye number 3 causes cancer in animals, but say there's no proof it does that in people. Second, they say they can't act more quickly because the staff that handles these safety reviews is too small and they need more money. The FDA budget for 2025 is $7.2 billion.